First news topic of the week, and yet again, there's another Monster Hunter Wilds drama, a performance drama. Basically, Reddit kind of exploded a couple of days ago with talk of a very curious situation where performance was extremely depressed on one guy's PC. He switched Steam accounts to his friend who owns, basically all of the DLC, and suddenly performance doubled. And that isn't a particularly good look, is it? This initial report came from a Reddit user called DeTylerMarande. DeTylerMarande? I'm not sure. But I'm sure Oliver is currently displaying his post from Reddit on screen, and you can determine your own pronunciation. Mm-hmm. However, the point is that it turned out to be true. Kind of. It turns out that what's actually happening in Monster Hunter Wilds is that while you're in the base camp, you actually are seeing the game constantly checking to see what DLC has been added to the game. And that is causing this tremendous performance drop. Now, the original video that was quote unquote dropped by the guy on Reddit came from a laptop, which is, obviously particularly CPU constrained compared to a desktop. However, I did decide to look into it, and by the time I looked into it, a mod was released on Nexus Mods, which basically used the RE framework mod system to remove the DLC check. And here are my results using a Ryzen 5 3600, which I suspect is probably a considerably more robust CPU than the one that the Reddit poster was using. So let's go straight into my results here, because there is merit to it. However, what I will say is that I do think, the concept of this sort of overarching performance drop has probably been over-egged a touch. It only happens in the base camp. Outside of the base camp, everything is fine. Actually, I'm just going to show this particular bit of footage here, comparison here, showing the mod on and off outside of the base camp. And yes, there is a performance fluctuation, but it's like 1.2%, which in a game like this, I would consider to be noise. So point is that for the most part, your gameplay isn't going to be affected by this performance issue, but it is a performance issue. Within the base camp, on the Ryzen 5 3600, in fact, everywhere, you're basically CPU limited on this game, even on the lowest settings. So, and I'm comparing that on a system that's using an RTX 4060 Ti, which I was benching for a project Alex is working on at the moment. Mm-hmm. And we're never GPU limited with that 4060 Ti, and we're using DLSS at 1440p, so internal resolutions are way below 1440p there, so that's quite remarkable. Anyway, let's take a look at some of the results here. First of all, what I will say is, to begin with, I couldn't actually find the issue. The issue kicked in when I first visited the person in the base camp that gives you access to the DLC menu where you can buy stuff from the Steam store. Once you actually interact with that person, this DLC check happens all of the time. And let's just take a look at lowest settings here. So on the left there, we've got the mod off. On the right, you've got the mod on, and in the little status window there, you'll see the thousands of checks that's happening on the DLC.
What the heck? DLC. You're right.
Yeah, it's crazy stuff, and the performance differential is kind of crazy. So lowest settings here: ray tracing off, DLSS ultra performance mode, which I guess at 1440p will be a 480p render. We're getting a 25.6% increase to performance here, 40 FPS versus 51 FPS on average, basically. Not great. We move on now to high settings, ray tracing on, which should in fact increase the CPU load. DLSS now in balance mode. We go from 38 FPS to 45.7 FPS by turning on the mod. So performance is increasing by 20% there. Again, not great, right? Ultra settings, everything ramped up, but we are still on DLSS balance mode here. 38 FPS again, turning off the DLC checks takes that up to 42.3 FPS, so 11.4% performance increase there. So yes, there is a problem here, and it does look quite, I'm going to say it's a bug, because everything seemed fine until I accessed that DLC menu. But it is a bug. And from a kind of, I don't know what you think, Alex, but from a sort of sense of how robust this code is, it's not a particularly good look, is it?
I would say it isn't a good look because the game shipped in a state, and it is still in a state where like the recommendation from the developer was to turn on FrameGen to get 60 FPS. And this, we've like ever since Dragon's Dogma 2, we've kind of wondered what is going on, like when a release comes out like that on this engine, where the initial performance isn't kind of what you expect given the visuals you're seeing on screen. And you kind of wonder what is going on in the background to actually cause this. And if you see stuff like this, which seems very unintentional, and at the same time questions of like how much oversight is going on regarding the game, especially this far into development already, where this is still a thing apparently, it just really throws up a lot of question marks and is not a very good look for Capcom's development of this game in particular. I still maintain, as I did say in the worst PC port video of the year with John when we were talking about it, I still maintain that I don't understand this game's visual output for its performance, and this is a great example of it. And it's unfortunate that it has to, this is a really embarrassing way to do it, where the community's finding through modding very like a huge CPU sink on a lower end CPU in a specific area of the game. Like I think if we measured it to being more than 3 milliseconds, and that is a very large chunk of CPU time actually for something that is just DLC checks. So yeah, it all is a very bad look, and it really shouldn't be up to the community to find this out.
You know, guys, though, it's almost the 20th anniversary of DLC.
Yes.
We realized this when recording the latest episode of the DF Retro Super Show, where we talk about 2006, where the Oblivion horse armor is basically the first ever DLC object for a console game. So
wow.
We're almost there, guys. It's almost a 20th anniversary, and now here we are. We've got games scanning like 25,000 random like DLC things and causing performance dips. So the future is now.
It's not great. I mean, I think the initial headline was kind of extremely damning. It's like, double performance by buying DLC, but that's not the case. It just seems to be like some sort of unfortunate oversight. I couldn't double performance, but to be honest, a 25.6% improvement in performance by not doing DLC checks is pretty damning, I think. I'm sure it's gonna be patched, because it is, it just seems to be a ridiculously simple thing to actually check. You don't need to be doing it like thousands of times
all the time.
I would venture to suggest in the base camp, but crazy stuff. I just don't really know what to make of this. It just doesn't particularly look good, I think, is the bottom line here. Now, bugs happen, oversights happen, but this one presumably would have been in there for probably since launch. Might even be an issue on the console versions. I guess part of the reason why it may have been unchecked is that left unchecked rather, is that it only affects the base camp part of the game. We did go outside, and that little counter you see sort of racking up the numbers there just stops when you leave the base camp. So, the vast majority of play is going to be unaffected. So in that sense, quote drama.com, but on the other hand, it just is not particularly impressive to behold, is it?
No, it isn't. And when I look at stuff like this, I do sometimes wonder what the testing environments are for developers. We see it with them not being necessarily perfect clean room examples sometimes. Like they're not maybe loading up like the Steam version of the game online and whatnot. We see that with shader compilation issues where they already have a machine with maybe a lot of shaders that have been compiled on it, and they don't think necessarily, oh, this could be a problem. And here I do wonder if their builds that they're testing are actually the ones that have a DLC check in the first place, or if they are ones also that have things like DRM, because this is not the first time Capcom's kind of had it's pants down, and the community is finding out things about game performance that are not very flattering. If you recall, Rich also reported on this back in the day with Resident Evil Village, and I reported on it in my initial review where I said every single time you kill an enemy, there is a stutter. And it was really weird. And that had to do with some sort of DRM scheme that the game had embedded in it. Rich reported on it using a DRM-less copy of the game to compare and contrast. And here, instead of having a DRM-less version, we have now RE framework tools, which allow this kind of modding to occur. And yeah, once again, Capcom being shown by the community that, hey, maybe you can work on this product in a different way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I guess that's all I've really got to say about it. It's not a great look, but it's not, game-breakingly bad. It's just poor practice, I think. But there have been other Monster Hunter Wilds stories happening while we've been away, specifically that the game has been data mined to, and it turns out that a massive array of data has been found concerning the Nintendo Switch Nintendo Switch 2 version of the game, including its entire sort of settings breakdown, and indeed the settings breakdown for every single version of the game, which I think is quite a remarkable thing. John, this was kind of unexpected, right? I think there was this kind of perception that maybe Monster Hunter Wilds was so CPU heavy, similar to Dragon's Dogma, that it was going to be a difficult / impossible port for Switch 2. But this data does seem pretty compelling, right?
Yeah, it really does. And it makes me wonder. My guess here, if I had to theorize, is that they probably initially found this difficult to port to Switch 2, and maybe it was initially written off. But given some of the commercial performance issues that they've faced with this game, knowing that it has underperformed, especially compared to Monster Hunter World, which was, I think, their biggest game ever, if I recall, it makes a lot of sense for them to sort of find a way to make this work on Switch 2, basically. And in addition, obviously since the early days, Capcom's work on the RE engine on Switch 2, the engineering side has likely continued, and they've probably made key strides in terms of performance optimizations that might have been necessary to get it to this point. So given everything happening and, the desire to make this more of a hit, I can see why sort of launching this game on Switch 2 would be important, especially given that Switch 2 itself is a huge success in Japan. So, and Monster Hunter traditionally does very well there. Though obviously I think Capcom was thinking bigger after the success of World. So I really hope that this is indeed the case and not just sort of like test settings from them messing around with it, trying to get it to work, but that it actually represents a proper product that is in development right now. So I would love to see it ship on Switch 2.
Absolutely. Alex, this document that's been circulating showing all of the settings, by my count, there's 99 different settings.
Yeah, my goodness.
That have been exposed in this document. And it does look as though it's kind of like very low setting equivalents with possibly upgrades to certain areas like shadows. Curious what you make about that.
Yeah, I see a couple of things here. A number of settings here, like enable foliage density culling, enable ground switch LED per patch. All the other platforms have that set to false, while Switch gets that set to true. And what we've seen in the past with Switch 2 ports is that they sometimes have specific settings that aren't even exposed in the other versions being cut down. You know what I mean?
Right.
And I think this is what we're going to end up seeing when this port comes out, because based upon even the lowest you were just running this on a Ryzen 5 3600. Based upon the performance we see on that CPU, this would be a questionable 30 FPS per default probably on the Switch 2, and would require even more fine tuning, I would imagine, to get it up to a more reasonable 30 FPS. And this document kind of does bear that out with things like that being shown there. Even with that being said, I still kind of question this, because this is one of the strangely heaviest games we have on the PC platform.
Right.
In spite of everything.
Yeah, it is. You notice the Switch 2 column also specifies there's 30 and 60 FPS modes, which is...
Oh, gosh.
Plus, there's a column that says fast load mode, which is interesting.
I wonder. But there's also another thing to talk about that I got pinged via social media about was there's also a DLSS value across all these config files. It's, can be enabled on PC. The other console versions obviously don't have that enabled, but the Switch 2 version, both in handheld and in the presumed docked play version, does have that set to enabled, and it's also set to what is preset D. Now, from my understanding and what I've heard, preset D in the Switch 2 sense should actually be the traditional CNN model we see from PC and not the Switch Lite version. And that would be interesting because we haven't seen many developers actually use the more traditional model, at least according to what we've seen. It usually seems to have like the breakup that we presume with the lighter model more often than not. And this being such a heavy title, you would have thought maybe they would have saved milliseconds per frame there by using the lighter model and just having slightly, lower image quality in the handheld or docked version. But according to this year, at least in their experimenting with getting this on Switch 2, it is set to preset D, which if it does come out with that, it could have better image quality than you might expect, which is interesting.
Yeah, certainly very, very interesting. I'm just curious to see whether this is actually going to happen. The concept of running Monster Hunter Wilds at 60 FPS. I mean, I can kind of get there outside on the Ryzen 5 3600, but it's hardly stable. And I'm certain more complex environments will cause that frame rate to drop. And it's, as I said, it's entirely CPU limited based on my testing with a 4060 Ti. Very limited testing, but even so, for the visual return you're getting, I don't understand why we're sort of so CPU burdened in that regard. Unless, of course, Alex, they're going to be getting to 60 FPS using frame generation, which would be a first on Switch.
I don't think we've seen frame gen on Switch. I don't know if I want to see frame gen on Switch, right. Based upon the way it's been used and abused across the console spectrum when we do see it. And here, there was that interview that we talked about last week, Oliver and I, regarding Ark Survival Ascended. And there was mention of either porting FSR 3 frame gen to Switch 2 or somehow getting NVIDIA to support FG on the Ampere Switch set that is, in the Switch 2 there. I doubt both of those things will happen very soon, if at all, if ever, just because it is a large undertaking to port FSR 3 to a different API in general, I'd imagine, and it would not be done by AMD. That I don't believe AMD would be doing that. It could be on a per developer basis if that did happen.
Yeah, there's nothing to stop developers doing their own port of FSR3, which is exactly what happened with Immortals of Avium. It wasn't actually an AMD joint there. It was a developer that took the source code and adapted it and kind of made it work. What can I say? I'm really interested to see what's going to happen with Monster Hunter Wilds. Also interested to see whether this DLC issue gets patched. I know that the original Reddit poster has reported the issue to Capcom. Hopefully it get fixed, but certainly curious situation nonetheless. Not really was what I was expecting to be spending half the day testing yesterday, that's for sure.
Sorry, Rich.
Well, I had to give you some time off from looking at Monster Hunter Wilds.
Yeah, the torture. I've already been tortured enough, right?